I really never thought of myself as a feminist when I was growing up. In fact, a feminist was sort of something out of the 19th century to me, because my mother certainly wouldn't have called herself a feminist, although I know she had very strong feminist ideals, but she wouldn't have used the word. In the circles that I was in, there was no history of the women's movement in the 19th century, the whole women's rights. I never heard of Seneca Falls and all of that until much later. As I was growing up, I recognized that, there was male privilege, but it didn't really strike me as something to be fought against until, I was suddenly aware of the women's movement. And that was really not until the late 60s. I did not read Betty Friedan's book when it first came out in 1963 or 4. I read it maybe 5 years later, after I realized that she had helped spark the whole thing. But it wasn't. It did take sparks to ignite it, but it was there. It was moving by the 60s. The thing that had happened, of course, is my mother had just come of age in Canada where there was at least, I don't know whether it's true, but she had not encountered any women's movement there. The early 20th century in this country was such a galvanizing time for women who wanted to get the vote, that once they got the vote, that seemed to be it. That was the thing everybody wanted, and it was done. It was over. Nothing to fight for, except for a few people like Alice Paul, who realized that it was a lot to be fought for, and she introduced the Equal Rights Amendment sometime in the early 20s. I think it might have been the year I was born, 1923. She had it introduced into Congress, and it was introduced every year after that for, I don't know whether it continued to be introduced during World War II, but again, after World War II, it started being reintroduced. It wasn't until the 70s that it actually got enough votes to be put out for state ratification. And then, of course, it never did get ratified. But Alice Paul was one of those few women in between the two movements of the 20th century who persisted. And of course, there were many women who worked hard for all the beginning early rights. Women in the Labor Department, the National Labor Department, in Roosevelt's administration, and Eleanor Roosevelt herself did a tremendous amount. But that all didn't seem to me. I wasn't terribly aware of it, and it didn't seem to me to be anything important until the second movement came along, until what is called the second wave began, and that was such an enormous grassroots welling up of consciousness, as it was suddenly called, consciousness raising, and women began to see what had to be gained and fought for, and have been doing it ever since.